The training arena of the Interstellar Academy was filled with the echoes of clashing weapons, bursts of strange alien energy, and the sharp calls of instructors shouting commands in dozens of different languages. Yet Alex Carter stood quietly at the edge, observing with the curiosity of a human who was still very new to the galaxy-Enaus way of life. He had only been at the Academy for a few months, and every day still felt like stepping into a living museum of wonders, where species from faraway stars trained side by side. His mind often wandered as he tried to study their movements, their unique styles of combat, and the strange rituals they performed after each sparring round. That day, his attention was drawn to a duel in the center ring, where a tall, graceful alien girl with shimmering skin the color of pale silver was engaged in a sparring match. Her name was Soraya, and though she was one of the most talented cadets in the class, the duel was not going her way. Her opponent struck her blade from her hands and sent her crashing to the ground. The arena fell into a hush as Soraya tried to rise, her long hair damp with sweat, her breaths shallow and labored. Alex, standing nearby, instinctively reached into his training bag, where he had stashed a rolled-up towel, and stepped forward without a second thought. To him, it was nothing more than a small gesture, an act of kindness that any human might offer when seeing someone exhausted. He extended the towel toward her, holding it with a polite smile, not noticing the sudden way the crowd of alien cadets stilled. Soraya froze as if the simple cloth burned with heat, her wide eyes fixed on the object in his hand. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached out, and when she finally accepted it, the arena seemed to draw in a collective breath. Alex, puzzled, watched as she gripped the towel with an intensity that did not match the situation. The whispers began almost immediately, carried in low voices by cadets of every species present. Some gasped in disbelief. Others covered their mouths as though they had just witnessed a forbidden act. Alex blinked, uncertain why everyone was staring. To him, this was no different than offering a bottle of water or lending a hand, but the look on Soraya's face told him otherwise. Her silver skin flushed with a faint, shimmering glow, and her expression shifted from shock to something unreadable, as though she had just been handed a responsibility far larger than the moment itself. She bowed her head slightly, clutching the towel against her chest with a seriousness that unsettled him, then rose to her feet and walked away without a word, leaving behind an arena filled with murmurs. Alex remained standing awkwardly, the weight of countless curious eyes pressing down on him, yet he still had no idea what he had done wrong, or perhaps what he had done right. He tried to shrug it off, telling himself that the alien cadets were just overreacting, but deep inside he could not shake the strange chill that passed through the air after that simple act. It was as if, with one unconscious gesture, he had stepped across a line he could not see. Later that evening, as the cadets gathered in the common hall for their post-training meal, Alex noticed how different the atmosphere felt. Whenever he entered a room, conversations dropped to whispers. Groups of cadets stole glances at him, some with curiosity, others with something close to fear. When Soraya walked in, the hall grew tense, and her eyes immediately found his across the tables. For a brief second, their gazes locked, and Alex felt a jolt of unease as if she was silently demanding an answer to a question he did not yet understand. She did not approach him, not then, but her expression carried a strange weight that left him unsettled for the rest of the evening. He kept asking himself why handing over a towel could possibly matter in a place where beings from across the stars trained for war and survival. But no answer came. Only silence, only stares, and the faint sense that he had just stumbled into something far greater than a simple misunderstanding. By the time he returned to his quarters, Alex realized his day had ended far differently than it began, for while the academy had once felt like a place of wonder, it now carried a tension that wrapped itself around him, whispering that his life at the academy, and perhaps humanity, as place within it, would never be the same again. The morning after the strange incident in the arena, Alex awoke to an unusual quiet that seemed to linger in the corridors of the academy like a shadow waiting to reveal its form. He could not tell if it was his imagination, but every step he took was accompanied by distant whispers that ceased the moment he entered a room, as if conversations died upon his arrival. In the training hall, his fellow human cadets carried on as normal, But the alien cadets kept their distance, eyes flicking toward him with a mixture of awe and unease. He tried to ignore it, focusing instead on his warm-up routine, though he felt as if he were the center of an invisible storm. Then Soraya arrived. She walked with the poise of someone who belonged to an ancient tradition, her silver-toned skin glowing faintly in the artificial lights of the academy, her steps soft but deliberate. Unlike yesterday, there was no trace of defeat in her eyes, but rather a strange intensity, as though she had spent the night wrestling with something greater than exhaustion. When her gaze found Alex, the hall once again seemed to fall silent. Without hesitation, she crossed the floor, ignoring the murmurs that rose and then hushed in her wake. She stopped only a few feet away from him and for a long moment said nothing, studying him as if measuring his very soul. Alex, unprepared for this kind of attention, simply stood still, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. Finally, Soraya spoke, her voice low but carrying the gravity of ancient ritual. "Do you understand what you gave me?" she asked, her words careful, as though they carried sharp edges that might wound if mishandled. Alex blinked, confused, and shook his head slightly. "It was just a towel," he replied, his tone calm though uncertainty tugged at his chest. A ripple of shocked gasps passed through the alien cadets, and Soraya's eyes narrowed not in anger, but in something closer to disbelief, as though she could not imagine anyone being so unaware of the significance. She drew closer, lowering her voice so that only he could hear, though the silence of the hall made it impossible for others not to notice the exchange. "In my people's tradition," she whispered, "a cloth freely given carries meaning. It is a mark of bond, of trust, of recognition deeper than words. It is offered only when one sees the worth of another." She paused, her expression searching his face, as though trying to determine if he was mocking her. "You handed it to me so freely, as though the meaning were nothing." Alex's chest tightened as he tried to grasp the weight of her explanation. He had not known, and yet in that moment he realized the depth of what he might have triggered. Around them, cadets were watching with wide eyes, some nodding as if confirming the truth of her words. Alex swallowed and finally spoke, keeping his tone steady. "I didn't know your customs," he admitted, "but I meant no harm. I only saw someone who needed help." For a moment, Soraya's face softened, the rigid mask of formality slipping just enough for him to glimpse something more vulnerable beneath. She studied him, perhaps searching for dishonesty but found none. Instead, her expression became unreadable once more, though her voice carried a faint tremor. "Then you are either the most reckless human in this academy," she said, "or the most honest one." She turned from him and walked away, but the hall remained hushed, as though the entire academy was holding its breath. The moment was not lost on anyone. Later, as the day's drills ended and the cadets dispersed, Alex sat alone in the quiet of the observation deck overlooking the academy's artificial sky. He tried to replay the moment again and again, asking himself whether his choice to act on instinct would come back to haunt him. Yet the more he thought, the more he realized that what unsettled him most was not the whispers or the attention, but Soraya's reaction, the way her hands had trembled, the way her voice had faltered, as though something about his gesture had touched her more deeply than she wanted to admit. What Alex did not know was that his simple act had already stirred questions among the Academy's leadership. In private chambers, instructors of Soraya's species debated whether the bond she spoke of could truly be formed by accident, or whether fate itself had a hand in it. Some saw danger, fearing that if the bond was recognized, it could tie her destiny to a human not yet trusted in the wider galaxy. Others saw potential, a chance to test humanity's sincerity in ways no treaty could. By nightfall, Alex had begun to sense that this was no small misunderstanding, but a moment that would ripple far beyond his own life. He looked out at the stars simulated above the Academy dome and wondered if his gesture had somehow opened a door he was not ready to walk through. Yet deep inside, a quiet resolve began to grow, a recognition that while he had not known the custom, he could not deny the honesty behind his act. Whether that honesty would be enough to withstand the weight of alien traditions remained uncertain, but for now, one thing was clear. Soraya's reaction was not the end of the matter, but the beginning of something far larger, and the Academy would not let it rest. By the next morning, the Academy no longer felt like the same place Alex had come to know, for the halls carried a strange hum that was not mechanical, but human and alien alike. The quiet noise of cadets whispering his name as he passed, their eyes filled with curiosity, doubt, or sometimes quiet fear. It was not the kind of attention he had ever wanted, and yet he could not escape it. Wherever he went, voices seemed to rise just beyond his reach, speaking of bonds, traditions, and possibilities that he barely understood. In the mess hall, trays paused mid-air as conversations fell silent at his entrance, and then resumed in hushed tones as he sat down, pretending to ignore the way heads turned in his direction. Even among his fellow human cadets, the mood was uneasy, for while some congratulated him as though he had achieved something grand, others warned him that he was playing with forces too great for any outsider to handle. Alex kept his composure, eating quietly, though his thoughts raced with questions. What disturbed him most was not the gossip itself, but the sense that the entire academy had shifted as though invisible threads of destiny were weaving themselves around him, and Soraya pulling them into something neither of them had chosen. Later that day, he entered the library, hoping to bury himself in study and escape the noise of speculation, but he found that the whispers had followed him even there. Alien cadets glanced his way, some curious enough to approach, though most stayed at a respectful distance, their gazes sharp with unspoken questions. At one corner table, 2 cadets of Soraya's species were debating in low voices, unaware that Alex could hear them. If the bond is true, then her path is no longer her own, one said, his tone heavy with worry. It cannot be allowed. The other shook her head, replying with quiet intensity. Or perhaps this is the test our elders have spoken of. Maybe he is meant to be the one who proves humanity's place among us. Their words unsettled Alex, but before he could dwell on them further, a voice interrupted his thoughts. You look lost, Soraya said, standing at the end of his table, her expression calm but her eyes betraying the same storm that churned in his chest. She sat down across from him, ignoring the stares of those around them, and for a long moment neither spoke, as though both were weighing whether to acknowledge the growing pressure of the Academy's attention. Finally, she leaned forward and whispered, They will not stop talking, Alex. What you did cannot be undone. You touched a part of my people as tradition that even I was not ready to face. He frowned slightly, lowering his voice. And what does that mean for you? Her lips pressed into a thin line before she answered. It means I am now being watched as closely as you. To some, I am a symbol of weakness, because I accepted your gesture. To others, I am a symbol of change because I did not reject it. Either way, I have become something I never wanted, a question mark for my people's future. Alex's chest tightened at her words, for he could see the weight she carried, and he hated that his small act had placed her in such a position. Yet before he could speak, she continued. You need to understand, Alex. For us, a bond is not a casual thing. It is not only about trust, it is about destiny. They will test us. They will probe every word and action. And if either of us falters, the consequences will not fall only on me, but on both of us. He exhaled slowly, his mind grasping at the enormity of her warning. Then what do we do? He asked quietly. For the first time since the towel had changed everything, Soraya's composure cracked, and a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. We endure, she said. We endure until we can prove that whatever has begun between us is not a weakness, but a strength. With that, she rose and walked away, leaving Alex alone with her words echoing in his mind. That night, as the artificial stars of the Academy dome shimmered overhead, the whispers grew into something heavier, carried not only by cadets but by instructors who watched him with thoughtful eyes, measuring every move he made. He realized then that this was no longer about him or Soraya alone, but about humanity's place in a galaxy that still questioned whether humans belonged among the stars. His gesture had set a wheel in motion, and though he did not yet know where it would lead, he understood one thing clearly. The whispers that filled the Academy were not simply gossip. They were the sound of destiny unfolding, and he was caught in its center, unable to step aside. The following days at the academy unfolded like a storm, slowly gathering strength, each hour thick with tension that neither Alex nor Soraya could ignore. For though the whispers of cadets still buzzed in the background, something heavier now loomed over them. The attention of the elders, a council of tradition keepers who rarely concerned themselves with academy affairs, but who had now turned their sharp gaze toward the strange human who had unknowingly walked into one of their most sacred customs. Alex learned of this when he was summoned unexpectedly to the central hall, a vast chamber carved into the academy's heart, where ancient banners of alien houses hung in silent witness, their symbols glowing faintly as though alive. Soraya walked beside him, her expression calm but her posture rigid, and though she spoke no words, her presence was a shield of silent strength that steadied him as they entered the hall. There, seated in a semicircle upon high platforms, were the elders of her people, their faces stern yet unreadable, their voices low as they conferred in their own language, before finally falling silent. One of them, a tall figure with eyes that glowed like pale silver, addressed Alex directly, his voice deep and slow, carrying the weight of ages. "Human, you have given a gift that binds. Do you understand the meaning of your act?" Alex hesitated only briefly before replying, his voice steady though his heart pounded. "I understand enough to know it was not taken lightly, and I do not wish to disrespect it." A ripple of murmurs passed among the elders, and Soraya's eyes flickered toward him in what might have been surprise, or perhaps relief. Another elder, her tone sharp like a blade, leaned forward. "Words are easy, human, but tradition is not satisfied with words. If you wish to stand by what you have begun, you must face the test of tradition. Fail, and not only your honor but hers will be stained." The declaration sent a chill through the chamber, and Alex understood in that moment that escape was no longer possible. He had been pulled too far into their world, and now the only path was forward. He nodded once. "Then I will face it." The silver-eyed elder inclined his head slightly, as though recognizing something within the human's resolve, and with a gesture dismissed the council. As they left the hall, Soraya finally spoke, her voice low but urgent. "Do you know what you have agreed to?" He shook his head honestly, and she exhaled in frustration, though there was no true anger in her tone. "The test is not a game, Alex. It will measure your courage, your truth, and your bond with me. If you fail, it will not matter that you meant no harm. They will see it as proof that humanity is unfit to share in our ways." He absorbed her words in silence, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Yet beneath the fear there was also a strange clarity. "Then I'll just have to pass," he said quietly, and though she gave him a look filled with disbelief, there was also a flicker of respect in her eyes. That night the academy seemed to hold its breath, every corridor and chamber alive with rumors of the upcoming trial, cadets gathering in groups to speculate on what the test would be and whether the human could possibly survive it. Some scoffed, saying he would crumble at the first challenge. Others whispered of old prophecies that spoke of outsiders breaking barriers. Alex ignored them all, focusing instead on preparing himself as best he could, though no one would tell him exactly what the test entailed. It was not until dawn the next day that the answer came, when he and Soraya were led beyond the academy walls to a vast chamber beneath the planet's surface, its walls carved with glowing runes that pulsed like heartbeats. The air was thick with energy, and the silence within was almost sacred. An elder stepped forward, his voice echoing off the stone. "The test of tradition begins now. You will face 3 trials: truth, endurance, and unity. Only if you succeed in all will the bond be recognized as strong." Alex's pulse quickened, but he lifted his chin, ready to face whatever came. The first trial, truth, began at once. As the runes flared and formed illusions around him, visions of Earth, of his family, of moments from his past, both joyful and painful. A voice whispered, asking him if he truly belonged among the stars, if he was not simply a fragile being playing at greatness. He felt the doubt pierce him, but he answered firmly, "I may be fragile, but that does not mean I am without worth." The illusions flickered and faded, and the elders nodded in approval. The second trial, endurance, was harsher. He was thrust into a chamber of searing heat and crushing pressure, his strength tested as minutes stretched into hours. His body trembled, sweat pouring down his face. Yet when he looked up, he saw Soraya standing beyond the barrier, her eyes steady on his, and the thought that she too would bear shame if he failed drove him to push forward. Finally, the pressure relented, and he collapsed to his knees, exhausted but unbroken. The third trial, unity, was the most difficult, for it demanded not his strength or honesty, but his bond with Soraya. They were placed together in a chamber of shifting light where nothing was solid, and only by trusting each other's guidance could they move forward. At first they stumbled, each step uncertain, but as they began to listen not just with words but with presence, they found a rhythm, guiding each other through the illusions until the chamber dissolved into light and they emerged together side by side. Silence fell as the elders regarded them, and for a long moment Alex feared he had failed, until at last the silver-eyed elder spoke. "The bond holds. The test is passed." A wave of relief washed over him, and he turned to Soraya, who for the first time allowed herself a small, genuine smile. Yet even as triumph filled the air, Alex sensed something deeper stirring among the elders, as though the outcome of the test was not the end, but the beginning of something far greater. A change that would ripple far beyond the walls of the academy, and perhaps alter the place of humanity in the galaxy forever. In the days following the test of tradition, the academy no longer felt like the same place to Alex, for though he had passed the trials and earned the recognition of the elders, the air around him grew heavier with each passing hour, as if the outcome had disturbed an ancient balance rather than settled it. And everywhere he went, he felt the eyes of cadets, instructors, and even strangers upon him. Some watched with admiration, whispering that the human had proven himself in ways none expected, while others regarded him with open suspicion, claiming that he had manipulated the test or that Soraya herself had guided him unfairly. Soraya, however, stood firm by his side, though her demeanor had shifted subtly. Where once she had treated him with playful formality, now her gestures were quieter, more thoughtful, as though she was weighing not only his courage, but what it meant for her own place among her people. Yet beneath this surface of tension lay something more dangerous, a current of unease that began to reveal itself when strange messages appeared in the Academy's halls, symbols painted in glowing ink, warnings in her people's tongue that spoke of betrayal, corruption, and outsiders who would bring ruin if not stopped. At first, Alex dismissed them as nothing more than the gossip of fearful cadets, but the warnings grew bolder, appearing outside his quarters, carved into the training arena walls until even the instructors could no longer ignore them. The elders convened again, though this time not in ceremony but in secrecy, their concern evident though they spoke little to outsiders. And Soraya told Alex in hushed tones that there were factions among her people who despised the idea of change, who clung to the belief that tradition should never bend, and that his survival in the test was seen by them not as a sign of strength, but as a threat to their authority. The tension soon spilled into the daily life of the academy. Sparring matches became more aggressive. Cadets whispered insults in passing, and Alex found himself constantly challenged, as though every step he took was another provocation. Still, he refused to retreat, reminding himself that backing down would not only dishonor him, but also reflect poorly on Soraya, whose name had already been tied to his by custom and ritual. Matters grew worse when a challenge was issued. Not an official test sanctioned by the elders, but a duel demanded by a senior cadet from Soraya's world, a towering figure named Kale, whose strength and reputation made him feared across the academy. Kale accused Alex of stealing honor that was not his, of twisting sacred customs, and in front of a crowd he declared that if Alex truly believed in his place among them, he should prove it in combat. Soraya urged Alex to refuse, reminding him that Kale sought not fairness but humiliation. Yet Alex understood the unspoken truth. If he refused, the whispers of cowardice would spread, and whatever respect he had gained from the trials would crumble. He accepted the challenge, his voice steady though his stomach turned with dread, and the duel was set for the following night in the old arena beneath the academy. where echoes of countless battles lingered in the stone. That night, as he prepared, Soraya came to him in silence, placing a hand on his shoulder and meeting his eyes with a seriousness he had not seen before. "If you fall, they will not only shame you, they will shame me. Fight not with anger but with truth." Her words stayed with him as he entered the arena, where the cadets had gathered in hushed anticipation, their faces glowing in the torchlight. Kale stood already waiting, his stance proud and his eyes burning with contempt. And as the duel began, Alex quickly realized the difference between sparring with his classmates and standing against a warrior bred for combat. Each blow Kale delivered was like a storm, forcing him to retreat, his body aching with the effort of blocking and dodging. Yet Alex refused to surrender. He studied Kale's rhythm, his movements, and remembered the lessons of unity from the test, focusing not on brute strength but on precision and resolve. Slowly, he began to adapt, landing strikes that surprised his opponent, forcing Kale to respect him if only in silence. The battle stretched on, the crowd shifting from whispers of doubt to gasps of disbelief, until finally, Alex managed a decisive move, unbalancing Kale and driving him to the ground. The arena erupted in noise, some shouting in triumph, others in outrage, and though Kale rose again with fury in his eyes, the duel had been decided. The elders, who had been watching from the shadows, stepped forward to declare the fight ended, their voices calm but their eyes troubled, for they knew this would not silence the unrest, but only inflame it. Alex stood, breathing hard, his body bruised but unbroken, and when he looked toward Soraya, he saw not just pride but also fear, for she understood that their victory would echo far beyond the academy walls. In that moment, Alex realized the true nature of the rising tension. He and Soraya had become symbols unwilling yet unavoidable, and whether they wished it or not, their bond was now a spark that could ignite change or call forth ruin across her people's divided society. The duel with Kale should have ended the whispers, but instead it split the academy like a crack through glass, leaving two sides staring at one another with growing distrust. And though Alex walked the halls with his head high, he felt the weight of something larger than a cadet rivalry pressing down on him. Rumors spread that Kale's defeat was no accident but a sign that humans possessed tricks unfit for honorable combat. And in secret corners, factions gathered to argue whether Soraya had dishonored her people by standing with Alex. The tension grew worse when a high council meeting was called, not within the academy but in the towering citadel of her people's capital, and Alex was summoned to attend alongside Soraya. He had no choice but to follow, though unease gnawed at him, for the summons came with no details, only a command sealed with the crest of the elders. The journey to the citadel revealed the depth of the unrest. Streets once bright with banners of unity were now covered in hastily scrawled warnings. Vendors lowered their voices when Alex passed, and the eyes of soldiers lingered too long on his every move. Inside the citadel, vast marble halls echoed with the whispers of diplomats and elders, and Alex realized he was no longer being treated as a cadet, but as a figure placed on trial before an entire culture. The council chamber itself was immense, a circle of stone thrones surrounding a platform where he and Soraya stood together beneath the cold gaze of 100 voices. The accusations began immediately. Some elders claimed Alex had disrupted sacred balance by daring to claim victory in challenges meant only for their kind. Others said Soraya had violated her vows by sharing her strength with him. And still others feared that if outsiders could bend their traditions, then the foundation of their society was already crumbling. Soraya spoke with fierce conviction, reminding the council that their traditions had always evolved with time, that refusing to adapt would one day leave them broken. But her words only deepened the divide. Then came the breaking moment. Kale himself, his wounds not yet healed but his voice stronger than ever, entered the chamber uninvited, declaring that Alex's victory had been illegitimate, that he had uncovered proof of human deception, and he presented a shard of technology, something foreign, metallic, glowing faintly, as evidence. The chamber erupted in outrage, elders demanding explanations, voices clashing in a storm of accusation. Alex, stunned, recognized the shard not as a weapon, but as a simple piece of Earth's training equipment, harmless, yet twisted by Kale into proof of dishonor. He tried to explain, but few listened, and when the council demanded silence, one elder proposed a solution more dangerous than anything before. A final test, not within the academy but within the sacred vaults of their ancestors, a place where no outsider had ever walked. If Alex survived, he would prove his worth beyond question. But if he failed, his life would be forfeit, and Soraya's honor would collapse with him. The decree was met with mixed cries, some for justice, others for blood. And Alex knew then that this was no longer about him or even Soraya. It was about the survival of trust between two peoples on the edge of fracture. That night, within the quiet of the guest chamber, Soraya confronted him with eyes sharp as steel, yet filled with worry, telling him the vaults were not a mere trial ground, but a labyrinth of ancient tests meant to measure the soul of her people, shaped by dangers that no human mind had ever encountered. "If you enter, you may not return," she whispered, her voice breaking for the first time since he had met her. And Alex understood she was torn between protecting him and preserving the fragile bridge their bond had built. But Alex, though afraid, could not back down, for he realized that every step since handing her that towel had led to this, that every test, every whisper, every duel had been a climb toward a single decision, whether humanity would stand as a partner in her people's future or retreat into the shadows of distrust forever. He placed his hand over hers and answered simply, "Then I will enter, because if I don't, they will never see us as equals." Soraya did not speak again, but her silence was filled with unspoken resolve, and when dawn came, they walked together to the vault's colossal gates carved with symbols older than her empire. As the council watched from the cliffs above, Alex stepped forward, the doors opening with a groan of ancient stone. And as he crossed the threshold, a chill ran through him, for he knew this was no test of strength alone but of spirit, and whatever waited inside was designed not to challenge his body, but to shatter his very sense of self. And as the gates closed behind him, cutting off Soraya's desperate gaze, the world fell into darkness, and the true breaking point began. The duel with Kale should have ended the whispers, but instead it split the academy like a crack through glass, leaving two sides staring at one another with growing distrust. And though Alex walked the halls with his head high, he felt the weight of something larger than a cadet rivalry pressing down on him. Rumors spread that Kale AS' defeat was no accident, but a sign that humans possessed tricks unfit for honorable combat. And in secret corners, factions gathered to argue whether Soraya had dishonored her people by standing with Alex. The tension grew worse when a high council meeting was called, not within the academy, but in the towering citadel of her people's capital, and Alex was summoned to attend alongside Soraya. He had no choice but to follow, though unease gnawed at him, for the summons came with no details, only a command sealed with the crest of the elders. The journey to the citadel revealed the depth of the unrest. Streets once bright with banners of unity were now covered in hastily scrawled warnings. Vendors lowered their voices when Alex passed, and the eyes of soldiers lingered too long on his every move. Inside the citadel, vast marble halls echoed with the whispers of diplomats and elders, and Alex realized he was no longer being treated as a cadet, but as a figure placed on trial before an entire culture. The council chamber itself was immense, a circle of stone thrones surrounding a platform where he and Soraya stood together beneath the cold gaze of 100 voices. The accusations began immediately. Some elders claimed Alex had disrupted sacred balance by daring to claim victory in challenges meant only for their kind. Others said Soraya had violated her vows by sharing her strength with him, and still others feared that if outsiders could bend their traditions, then the foundation of their society was already crumbling. Soraya spoke with fierce conviction, reminding the council that their traditions had always evolved with time, that refusing to adapt would one day leave them broken. But her words only deepened the divide. Then came the breaking moment. Kyle himself, his wounds not yet healed but his voice stronger than ever, entered the chamber uninvited, declaring that Alex's victory had been illegitimate, that he had uncovered proof of human deception, and he presented a shard of technology, something foreign, metallic, glowing faintly as evidence. The chamber erupted in outrage, elders demanding explanations, voices clashing in a storm of accusation. Alex, stunned, recognized the shard, not as a weapon, but as a simple piece of Earth's training equipment, harmless, yet twisted by Kale into proof of dishonor. He tried to explain, but few listened, and when the council demanded silence, one elder proposed a solution more dangerous than anything before. A final test, not within the academy, but within the sacred vaults of their ancestors, a place where no outsider had ever walked. If Alex survived, he would prove his worth beyond question, but if he failed, his life would be forfeit and Soraya's honor would collapse with him. The decree was met with mixed cries, some for justice, others for blood, and Alex knew then that this was no longer about him or even Soraya. It was about the survival of trust between two peoples on the edge of fracture. That night within the quiet of the guest chamber, Soraya confronted him with eyes sharp as steel, yet filled with worry, telling him the vaults were not a mere trial ground, but a labyrinth of ancient tests meant to measure the soul of her people, shaped by dangers that no human mind had ever encountered. "If you enter, you may not return," she whispered, her voice breaking for the first time since he had met her, and Alex understood she was torn between protecting him and preserving the fragile bridge their bond had built. But Alex, though afraid, could not back down, for he realized that every step since handing her that towel had led to this, that every test, every whisper, every duel had been a climb toward a single decision. Whether humanity would stand as a partner in her people, as future, or retreat into the shadows of distrust forever. He placed his hand over hers and answered simply, "Then I will enter, because if I don't, they will never see us as equals." Soraya did not speak again, but her silence was filled with unspoken resolve, and when dawn came, they walked together to the vault's colossal gates, carved with symbols older than her empire. As the council watched from the cliffs above, Alex stepped forward, the doors opening with a groan of ancient stone. And as he crossed the threshold, a chill ran through him, for he knew this was no test of strength alone, but of spirit. And whatever waited inside was designed not to challenge his body but to shatter his very sense of self. And as the gates closed behind him, cutting off Soraya's desperate gaze, the world fell into darkness, and the true breaking point began.